Is that showing it's recording now?
Yes.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm Melissa Schwartz. I'm the managing broker of the Realty One Group Paradise Valley office. And welcome to another Tuesday training and tactics, but we're calling this WTF. Oops, let me click on my screen. These are Leah Kramer's slides from our Goodyear office. She tends to have more explicit language than I do, but I didn't take out those slides. I did add a few for you guys from me, but please type your questions into the chat box. Kat is here, our wonderful office admin, who is also a licensed agent. And so she's going to get me your questions as we proceed. I also have questions from Leah's conversation that took place, a presentation last week, so that I can continue to add those if you guys aren't asking questions. I have a whole bunch of stuff. Wow, I'm hoping all of you attended last week. What an incredible presentation. Lots of new forms coming up. If you're not familiar with the buyer broker employment agreements, please watch my video. It is on YouTube, on our Paradise Valley YouTube channel. This one will be added by tomorrow. To recap, the co-broke will be removed from the MLS on 8/1, and fines, did y'all hear that? Fines for failure to have a signed buyer broker agreement are implemented. We'll go over what some of those fines might be if you missed the earlier presentation. You must have one of these forms signed before showing a buyer properties. The buyer broker exclusive employment agreement, it is 3 pages, or the buyer broker agreement to show property, it is 1 page. Now, the WWLD is what would Leah do? She has a lovely shirt that comments on that. I don't have that shirt. I'm not going to wear it, but I love Leah's commentary. And I loved that she said, how many of you regularly have used the buyer broker agreement in the past? Yeah, that's about right. So we have a quarter of the room at best. Not sure how many hands are going up on your screen if folks wanted to put their hands up. She said if 90% of them said that they used it, she would know that that was absolutely bullshit because they do not use them and she's not seen them. So yeah, really. If you've not used it and you think it's too scary or unlikely to be signed, then stick with the agreement to show property. That is your choice. You know, the good news is that most of the information we dealt with last week is going to be the most overwhelming of the 3 classes. Today, we've just got a few items we're going to go over, going back over these, and we're going to go over our compensation agreements today. Okay. So let's see. I'm just stay on this page. The co-broke is being removed again on 8/1. The forms are all being released on 8/1. Well, there seems to be some misunderstanding is when are these required for use? Does anybody here want to tell me when they're required for use? The 16th? No, the 1st. The 1st, August 1st. NAR requires that they be used by the 17th. Arizona Association of Realtors and the Arizona Regional MLS says 8/1. So that means all these things are happening on the 1st day, right? Co-broke being removed, forms being released, and you have to start using these forms to avoid fines. If you were not here a few minutes ago, I have said that already once. So the first person that gets fined $500, please don't come into my office crying. The initial fee is $500, just so you know, and it goes up from there, and it goes up very, very rapidly. So we will go over that. Will there be a leniency period? I don't see one. So if anybody's found one, please let me know. But ARMLS, who's monitoring these, does not have any note of any leniency period. Once it begins, and fines are going to be assessed. Okay. Again, they begin at $500. That's once and once only, right? They jump very quickly after that. I would err on the side of caution to be ready to jump on 8-1 as we've discussed. So 2 options for signing a buyer broker agreement that is in compliance with the NAR settlement. The 2 choices are the BBEEA, the buyer broker exclusive employment agreement, right? That's the 3-page one. And it does bind you. Guess what? You're getting married, right? Awesome. So those of you with commitment issues, work on those, right? So otherwise, you're going to have to go with the showing one. But so during the term you are agreed to, you're married at that point. If they buy a home at any point during the term of that agreement, whether you actually showed them the home, whether you are named on the contract due to your exclusive employment agreement, you are owed a commission. Everybody understand that? Okay. So that's the biggest differentiator with the 1 page, which is the buyer broker agreement to show property. So some people had a misunderstanding that this was a single property showing form. It is not. We do not have a single property showing agreement. If you want to generate a document agreement exclusively for 1 property, then you just write that address on either of these 2 forms. That's your choice. That means you would only be potentially owed a commission for that specific address, okay? But there's not a form for that. So the buyer broker agreement to show property is in essence a non-exclusive agreement, right? So you are not married to each other. In short, that would be the one that you would use just to use, in essence, to be able to work with a buyer and show them homes. But at the end of the day, it doesn't entitle you to a commission if another agent is named on their purchase contract. So a buyer could feasibly sign with 20, 30, 40 agents, doesn't matter, right? And it's all okay, all kosher, that's fine. Whoever ultimately is named on their contract when the purchase contract is written and gets submitted is the only agent that will be paid. So I want to make sure that that's clear to you guys. And again, I was joking about the commitment issues, but it is going to be a reality very quickly. If you do not want to work committed to someone and you don't expect them to be committed to you, that is your choice. This is your business and we're going to support you in your business. But that is the difference between them. Okay, gotta love WWLD. What would Leah do, right? So that's what she says. Again, it's on her shirt. So sometimes her agents know this. She will, you don't have to accept Leah's answers, but let's just operate off what would Leah do when you ask if you regularly used a buyer broker agreement in the past. This is where she said, yeah, if more than 20% of you, you're lying to me. So here you go. At the end of the day, you don't need to lock them in right away with the 3 pages. Maybe you move up to that. So it's fine if you do really want to start with a showing property. If you are uncomfortable with the 3 pages, go ahead and start with a showing property. But try to get them into that full buyer presentation and get them to move up to the buyer broker agreement. If you think it's scary or you're really unlikely to hold them to an exclusive agreement, there may be lots of reasons you don't want to do it. Like I said, commitment, right? But maybe you work exclusively with referrals or repeat clients and you don't need to put a 3-page form in front of them because you've already, already earned their loyalty and they get it. That's fine. Again, it's going to be your choice. Don't let anybody tell you you can't use that form. They're both there for your use and you have to use what you're comfortable with. It's your business. You have to determine your business practices and what your value is and how you're going to present that to people. We're going to talk more about that a little later. Just know the repercussions and the possible consequences that come depending on that form. Right? If you just do the show property, then you hear, you know, Sam went out and wrote an offer with somebody else, even on the property you showed, you're not going to get a dime. All right? Yes.
Are agents really going to use that?
Yes. Yes.
What would be a use case for using that?
Exactly what I said, that you are not comfortable doing the exclusive and you just need to show a property. I think it's very much going to be used at open houses. If you are in an open house and somebody says, hey, I want to see the home down the street or whatever, it's not the time to try and get them to sign a 3-page. That to me would be my go-to form. Yes, I'd be happy to show you a property today. Let's go look at it. And then let me schedule an appointment. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow so I can show you my full value of what I bring to the table when I work with my buyers and why I think you will want to work with me after we have that conversation. Right? But if you can't have that conversation, you can't do your full buyer broker presentation, whether that is 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or a half an hour, right? Whatever you have in your own buyer presentation, you need to create that. But you can't do that off the cuff, meeting somebody at a coffee shop or an open house, or if, again, you get a referral from somebody else and they say, hey, look, this is a really great client of mine. Could you, meet them and see how things work out? They're not going to want to sign a 3-page document with you right then and there. Does that make sense? Okay. So there were a lot of questions on vacations. Who takes vacations? I don't know. I don't know many realtors that take. No, I'm Sarah. Actually, how many of you, when you do take a vacation, does your phone light up the minute you're heading to the airport, right? Or heading to the car, getting ready to go, and all of a sudden your phone blows up, right? So there were a bunch of questions on when people take vacations. If another agent shows homes for me while I'm on vacation, do they need a buyer broker agreement signed? So I would say no. Per NAR, the purpose of the buyer broker agreement is to clearly and transparently outline the services an MLS participant will provide and how they will be compensated. This was already addressed with you. If you have the buyer broker exclusive employment agreement, you've got that covered. If the BBEA is covered, then anyone showing on your behalf is showing for you. But I guess the question becomes a little more blurry is depending on what they're going to be doing for you, right? So if all they're doing is opening doors, I think you're covered. I think Leah kind of explained that. I think you're covered, right? The other agent will be doing more than opening doors, then use your employment agreement addendum and add them as a co-agent. Right? So they're under that umbrella. Do they need to re-sign your employment agreement? No, because you're adding them using the addendum. Robert will now be a co-agent while I'm out of town. I don't have to say while I'm out of town, but he'll be a co-agent so that they understand that that's under that umbrella of that employment agreement. And if if Robert ends up writing that offer while I'm out of town, then we're covered, right? And both names will go on that document if I can't get to a computer, right? Sometimes it all depends on how accessible the agent is while they're out of town. All right. So let's see. All right. I added a page here that Leah did not provide during hers. Let me try and go over here. So MLS policy changes. I'll send these slides out, but I'm not going to read through these. These were in our class last week, but there are quite a few changes, okay? And what is really going to be the issue is, I mean, you guys are going to look at this and go, yeah, whatever, right? I know that's your attitude towards policy changes, but this is the page you really need to be looking at. Why is that? These are the fines, right? And again, if you notice, most of the fines do start with $500 fines. Yes, there are some of the original ones that are the $50 for an incorrect list price, those things. But if you look at showings, failure to secure a buyer agreement with a buyer prior to showing listed property, the first offense is $500. The subsequent offense is a minimum of $5,000. That is not a typo. Okay? Get your buyer broker agreement signed, please. Okay, yes.
Does this go for rentals? as well? If I have
That-
a rental listing, what if I get the buyer to come to look at it? Do I need to get this signed from? the
Okay, are you representing the seller?
Seller, yes.
Again, on open houses, at any time you are the listing agent, you do not need a buyer broker agreement. Right? So that would go for leases as well. I would not tempt this. If you are doing rentals, you still need to have a buyer broker agreement. Now, it may very well be that on a buy for rentals, you're gonna do the showing property one. Maybe that's all you do. Because if you know that they're going to Zillow and every place else under the sun, maybe that's all you do, right? That's up to you. But I just want to make sure you guys are aware of these penalties. The ones in red, display of competitors, ARMLS data, that is all offenses, termination of participants' MLS service for up to 3 years. You cannot, under any circumstances, show your co-broke amount in the MLS, in the written comments, or in the slides that you might load in there. It cannot be on the MLS. This is not a joke. This is a part of a court settlement, and ARMLS has said, no, not happening. We're not going to be sued over this. You guys do it, you are going to be fined or lose access, okay? So just wanted to make sure that was very real for everybody. There's a lot on there, and you can take a look at that later. Let me see what page. All right. So, so for those of you who may not have been on the call last week, or maybe you don't know, while these fines are scary, there actually was a bill put forth in front of the governor to approve that would have made these written requirements mandatory for all agents, not just realtors, and not just armless subscribers, but all agents. I think everybody was cheering like this is a great idea. Well, we should all be held to the same standard. But on the flip side, there were some unique challenges with that. So it was actually the Department of Real Estate that went to the governor and supported a veto of that bill. Now, why would they do that? The reason is, had that become statute, it would have had penalties dealing with your license, meaning if you violated it, you could lose your license. And the Department of Real Estate did not want that to impact real estate professionals to that degree. I know those ARMLS fines are scary, but losing your license over those things would have made it even more scary. Okay, does that make sense? So when you hear that, that is why it was vetoed. We know this is going to be a struggle, right? So please, ultimately, ARMLS gets their information from other agents. When you call in and, report a violation, understand what you're doing, but also realize the violation gets called in on you, that's where we're getting our responses from. Okay, let's talk about few things that are helpful things. How many of you in this room were here last week? So it looks like most of you. You on the Zoom. Afterwards, I emailed everybody these links from the first class. Some of these we've sent out on our PV newsletter so that you have them as well. Facts.realtor, if you have not looked at this page, I would encourage you in the next 2 weeks, please, please, please go look at this. I love how people go on to the lovely Facebook forum groups. Gosh, they could get the actual answers if they just went to Facts.realtor instead of listening to other people and not getting all the correct information. So we gave you buyer and seller scripts from Forward Coaching. Some of you are like, if I just had the dialogue. You do. We gave it to you. There is dialogue there. If you have not seen the scripts, please take an opportunity to look at them. Again, in the next 10 days, please go do that. A copy of the general flow chart of the forms potentially needed in certain situations. This actually has Leah's Goodyear videos on her YouTube. Ours is Realty One Group Paradise Valley /videos. View all the updated sample forms. How many of you have looked at the sample forms? Please raise your hand. Oh my gosh, I hope online they're all raising their hands. The forms are available to see on aaronline.com. It's the very first front thing. It says best practices. You can click on it and see all of them. Now, can you use these forms right now? No. August 1st, that's right. So these are not available for use yet. Do not use the sample forms. Right? I don't want to see sample coming across my desk. You cannot do anything with these forms until 8/1. All right.
I do one.
Yes.
What if there is a current listing and the co-broke is already noted?
Well, I hope all the current listings have some co-broke noted, whether it's 0 or something other than that. I will get into that, so don't worry, we'll answer that question shortly. Here's the flow chart that has been shared in the previous session and earlier, I guess. So we're going to focus on these two agreements today. Compensation agreement between brokers and seller compensation addendum. So the SCA or the CAB, CABB. All right. So be sure I'm flipping the right page here. There we go. All right. Let's talk about what we will not cover today. We are not going to cover opinions on NAR or the NAR settlement terms, your opinions on the election or how that may affect the NAR settlement terms, or your creative ideas to circumvent the NAR settlement terms. Creativity here may cost you dearly, as we saw in those fines. So please don't try to get creative. What California, Washington, or any other state is doing, although we will bring up California in a little bit, scripts for addressing the NAR settlement terms with buyers or sellers. We sent you some of those, but we're not going to go over them. And scripts for sharing your value proposition with buyers as part of your buyer consultation. We have plenty of tools if you're a part of Realty One Group for your buyer consultation. If you're not, you can give us a call, come join us. But seriously, we have lots of buyer consultation materials. I hope you guys are all taking advantage of that and working on that. What we will cover, as I said earlier, the compensation agreement between brokers. We're referring to this as the CAB, not to be confused with Cabernet Sauvignon. That is a much more pleasant thing to enjoy, but it is the opportunity to get compensation there. The seller compensation agreement or addendum, which is the SCA. All right, let's see if I did. Let's see if I can pull it up though. Oops, hold on. Just have to go to more. Let's see if I've got the polls. Buyer broker agreements. Nope. Compensation. Let's launch this. So online, are you seeing it online? Okay. So folks here, you're just going to have to bear with it. You guys get to see what other people are responding if people start to answer these questions. I'm going to read through the questions. Buyer broker compensation must be negotiated with the listing agent in advance of making an offer. Do people online know how to do their polls? Hopefully they're clicking on that. Nobody's participating online. And I know we got a lot of people online. Oh, there we go. All right. Question number 2, is it possible that more than one form will be used to negotiate buyer broker commissions? Listing number 3, listing agents may list offers of compensation on their own websites. I can. I really didn't want you to see all those answers, but okay. 4, if the listing agent isn't offering the buyer broker compensation, I should not show the house unless my buyer is agreeable to paying my compensation as outlined on their buyer broker agreement. True or false? So folks here, you can have a conversation about that if you want. I'm going to wait just another minute and let people finish there. It says I've only got 10 out of 30 people online that have answered their questions.
No.
Melissa, for the record, that
32.
flow chart is really that, the beginning slide.
Yep.
Flow chart.
Yep, I will. I don't remember who made it. I'm not sure, but Leah could have it. I know Brian had his version. Leah is the one with the, the poly agentess. I know Leah made that one. So depending on which version. Brian took that out. He had a tough time with that one. So Brian Juris at our Scottsdale office. Okay, so few more people. How about here? Anybody have any ideas, thoughts? You guys are weighing in on them. Buyer broker compensation must be negotiated with the listing agent. We'll go over them one by one here in just a second, but if there are any thoughts you guys have, we've got a few more people online. Hopefully you've got some ideas on what you think the answers are.
And I feel like the last one, you should have already had that conversation and it's gonna have to pop up, because it's gonna pop up for sure.
That is part of what we're going to talk about.
Contract with, like, obligate, that shouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation.
That's
It's
right.
something to negotiate. And try to bring it back to the table.
Okay, I'm not sure anybody else is online, so I'm gonna go ahead. They may just have logged in and have disappeared here. We're gonna end the poll. Now, isn't this interesting? Buyer broker compensation must be negotiated with the listing agent in advance of making an offer. Interesting, half and half. How about in this room? How many of you think it's true? Hands up. How many of you think it's false? Hands up. And we've got some people that are uncommitted. Okay, the reality is that, we had some other stuff here. Hold on. Is that you don't have to negotiate in advance, because if you're not doing the CAB form, you don't need to know whether or not the buyer broker compensation is being negotiated with the listing agent, right? And we'll get in a little more into detail about that. I've got some questions I'll come back to. But this was actually neither true nor false. It's a maybe situation, right? So if you're using the seller compensation addendum, then you actually don't need it in advance, right? You will just submit the SCA with the offer. And if your buyer is paying you like straight up, they have the cash, you don't even have to worry about the SCA, right? You don't have to care about the listing side at all. Then obviously there's nothing to negotiate in advance. You're fine if you intend to use the CAB form, or if you have instructions from your buyer not to show you homes that aren't offering at least enough compensation to pay you. That would be a different scenario. And while you can attempt to negotiate that in advance, here's the flip side to the potential problem. You cannot hold up or delay the delivery of an offer while waiting to hear back from the listing agent, right? So there's a rabbit hole that could ultimately have a lot of other challenges to you if you delay submitting an offer because that listing agent has not gotten back to you. And we're going to talk about that today. So keep that in mind. It's possible that more than one form will be used to negotiate the buyer broker compensation. This is true. It is possible, right? You could actually have quite a few forms. You could have your buyer broker agreement. That is a means to getting paid, right? You could have the CAB form. You could have the SCA, the seller compensation addendum, and you can have concessions. You can employ all of those or any of these in a mix of them. So there are definitely different ways that you could end up using more than one form to do it. Let me move my screen. So most of you were absolutely spot on that question. Let's go to the third question. Listing agents may list offers of compensation on their own websites. Little split here, isn't it? So this is true with one little distinction that we're still trying to get some clarity on. The second click, you're absolutely correct. Some of you have heard about the 2 clicks rule, right? So it can be on your own personal website unless it's appearing on the home page, right? Because if you by any chance link in something that you add to the MLS that you can go to my website to find more information, and it can be clicked on and it's sitting right there, that is a no-no, right? But if somebody can click and then gets to your page and then it says compensation and they can click, that's a second click in. That appears to be okay. So based on the 2 clicks rule, if your personal website says I offer 3 potatoes in all my listings and you've included that link again in your personal website in the MLS, in the semi-private or private remarks, that would be out of compliance, okay? If it goes to a different page and they get to your website and then have to click onto the single property or then see compensation or commission for the single property, then that's okay. If you don't use the link in the semi-private or private remarks at all, then it's acceptable. So again, it's not a black or white answer. There's a lot of nuance to some of these things.
The website.
Where do you put your
The
website?
listing is on the private.
You can put it in the private remarks, it says, as long as the compensation isn't on that front page.
Okay.
So is what they're saying. I still am not sure I would do that, but the 2-click rule is for compensation, right? Doesn't say anything about a 2-click rule on AR MLS though. And if you actually go to the NAR settlement information, that's where it says, hey, it's acceptable to share your personal website link inside the semi-private and private remarks on the MLS. Okay, they have said that is acceptable. Where it becomes potentially unacceptable is if an agent clicks on that link and the first page is your home page and they see that compensation information immediately. So, you know, again, this is gray waters. I don't want to be the one testing this out, so be careful with that, but that is what we're seeing. 4th question. If the listing agent isn't offering buyer broker compensation, I should not show the house unless my buyer is agreeable to paying my compensation as outlined on their buyer broker agreement. What do you guys think here? We've got split true false on there. We said in writing, so false. The question is, do you have written instructions from your buyer not to show them a home in this case? And for this situation, most likely that clause or those instructions would appear on additional terms in your buyer broker agreement, right? I'm going to get ahead of her. This is Leah's. I'm going to get ahead of Leah here, but Leah is absolutely suggesting to use the SCA form. I'm going to voice this in my own way in a little bit, but she's even saying a call in advance to ask that she's not even a call in advance to ask compensation. They could tell me no, they aren't offering anything, or they could tell me that they're only of what that amount is. You know, I don't believe them necessarily, right? Because if you call a listing agent and they say, you know, it depends. It depends on what the offer is, right? I had this happen to me a month and a half ago. Somebody called and said, well, we want to increase the compensation. Will the seller do that? Like, depends on what the offer is, right? How is the seller supposed to know if we don't know what the offer on the table is? So if my buyer comes and says, they won't, you know, I'm sorry, if the buyer comes in and is willing to come in and pay 10,000 over asking price in exchange for my 3 potatoes, is the seller really going to say no? Right? Ultimately, this is about negotiation. If you're negotiating and the seller's getting their bottom net line, and by the way, that means listing agents, you need to know how to show the seller that they're getting that net that they're looking for and make sure you're doing those calculations, right? But is the seller going to say no? The seller's getting what they want. Will they pay the compensation no matter what it is? Will they pay that compensation? If they're getting their bottom line, probably. This is why for years people would say, well, what will the seller take? I'm like, I honestly don't know. Because I have seen over the years a seller tell me, I will not take a dime less than dot, 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 dot. And then sure enough, the minute you present that offer to them, oh my gosh, I'll take it. You're like, but you said you wouldn't. Things change, right? Something could have changed in that seller's life, but once that offer is presented, things change.
Money talk.
Money talks, that's right. All right. Let me, actually, I'm gonna share those results. Hopefully they are seeing those. I'm so sorry, folks, if
Yeah.
you didn't. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing that.
I did have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
So how would they place like the website and their listing private remarks for their information on a link at my website?
What was the question?
So how would we place that in our listing private remarks locations? Further information on a link at my website?
You would just put that, you could put further information at and then just put the website. The thing you cannot do is say information about compensation to be found. Please do not put anything on compensation in the MLS, just period. Okay, let me go back to this. All right. So next Tuesday, there will be a class on the ER, and during the ER class, we'll go into more depth on the listing side of things. So we're not ignoring that. And how you can promote your commissions or compensation to a buyer broker. So that will probably be covered more next week. If you or your seller are offering those and kind of what that side looks like. So more to come on that. We're going to focus on the compensation agreement between brokers, the CAB form. And yes, Leah does not like this form, but it is here for you to use. So it's up to you and your business practices. Do not use it yet, please. Does not start till August 1st. Okay. We're going to go through this relatively quickly, but I want to hit on the most important lines simply because you've never seen this form before, right? It's brand new. This is not something that was modified. It is all new. So at the top, you have the party information. This is pretty simple, right? Company, the agent's name, the buyer or tenant name, seller or landlord, broker, right? Because this is specific to one property. There's a property address, right? Because this is going to be coming from one listing. So you need to make sure that that is in there. This is not a universal form. This is a one by one form. If you're not getting a hold of the listing agent, you're not going to have this form from them and you're trying to create it. That can cause problems. So we'll talk about that in a second, right? You would have to fill this out specific to each property that you are submitting an offer for. It's between the appropriate parties who obviously the buyer and seller are going to vary. The agent and brokers are going to vary. The premise address is going to vary. So you need to do all of this has to be specifically filled out. I've seen a few, I've heard from some listing agents that they intend to have one of these completed already with their information, their seller's information, the address, the compensation amount. And then if you reach out to them and inquire about compensation, they're just going to forward this form to you. That's fine. And I highly encourage you, if that is what you're going to do, that you have that prepared in advance. I think that will work the best. What you cannot do, you cannot upload this into the MLS, right? Anybody looking for that $500 fine or $5,000 fine the second time? Go ahead, right? Cannot have anything about compensation in the MLS. So let's get down to the compensation section. Terms and conditions. This agreement shall become effective when fully signed, right? Both parties sign it. This agreement is contingent upon one, the fully signed agreement being delivered prior to or with an offer made by buyer to purchase or lease, whoever was talking about leasing, lease the premises. All right, stop right there. The prior to, for those of you who intend to use this form, is really what you should focus on. Now, again, you can't delay submitting the offer. So you have to get this signed pretty darn quickly. If that is the goal, the risk with submitting it with an offer, what if they don't sign it? Right? You want this before you submit the offer. You want the information from the listing agent so you know that information as you go in. And honestly, I am in agreement with Leah. I think that the SCA is probably the best form. My only comment is we currently have this cab form. And if you can reach the listing agent and you already know that they're willing to provide some compensation, you're starting a little bit up your little meter here, right, of what you're trying to get. If this is your total compensation on buyer broker, maybe you've got this much, right? And then you know you need to get this additional amount. Or maybe you're starting here and you're only trying to negotiate for this amount. But it gives you a starting point if they're offering something. So my comment is you can go ahead and use it. If you're uncomfortable using it, stick with the SCA, all right? But it allows you a foundation. Again, make sure though, you cannot not submit an offer because you do not have this. If you don't have this, move on. Move on immediately to the next one. We'll get to that one in a second. We'll finish this, right? Buyer and seller, number 2 is buyer and seller entering into a purchase contract or lease for the premises within 10 days or blank days of seller broker signing this agreement. Seller broker, not you, seller broker's signature. So listing agents, if you're signing this, you can't date it until you send it off, right? Because if you date it when you take the listing and now it's 3 months later, the 10 days, it's done, right? So you have to sign it, date it, and send it out, okay? Now, why the 10 days, right? Well, if you put 60 or 90 days, seller may change their mind, decide they don't want to offer that for that length of time. All of a sudden, you've got all these out there for 60, 90 days with these tails on them. The reason the 10 days was, it was like, you know, you can at least go back to your seller and say, you know, I sent one out yesterday. If you're going to change that, we've got other ones out there that are going to still be valid. You need to understand that, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, right? So I get why the 10 days is probably a pretty solid option. And lastly, if applicable, number 3, buyer closing escrow to purchase the premises pursuant to that purchase contract. In other words, you have to close to get the compensation. It doesn't exist otherwise, right? So that makes sense. Line 13 at the very bottom of this says buyer broker compensation. Seller broker agrees to compensate buyer broker in accordance with the terms and conditions below. All right, so let's go. All right, Leah got tired of cookies and bananas, so hopefully you like her little humor with her eggplant choice.
Interesting.
There you go, yeah. So if you don't, call Leah. So check any that apply and fill in the compensation. Let's start with sale. It's going to be X% of the full purchase price or however many eggplants you are going to be paid or other. Still don't understand what the other is. I probably need to call Jim Sexton and ask where that came from. Probably somebody has a comment on that. Until then, generally speaking, we're looking for a percentage or dollar amount, please. Okay. Line 16.
Will the other be like a flat fee?
No, because the dollars would be a flat fee.
Maybe it's but it's a full.
Dollars would be a flat fee.
dollars. Okay.
No, that's why it's kind of like, I don't know, you get a car, you know, I don't know what you're putting down there. It's some other item of value. I don't know why we would use other, but somebody decided and it needed to be in there. Okay. Line 16, compensation to buyer broker is earned and payable when buyer or any entity owned or controlled by buyer closes escrow on a purchase or exchange of the premises. And again, we put that in there for your protection so buyers don't get a little too savvy and try to screw you out of a deal with an LLC. How many of you have seen these little LLCs changing name after name after name, and all of a sudden, you know, you're closing and it's not the same name you started with, and where's that put your little buyer broker agreement? Because it's not the same name. Well, if it's still the same buyer and they're part of that LLC, they still owe you a commission. Okay, so be aware of that if they're pulling things around and changing the name of who's on there, okay? Let's go back to this. Buyer broker represents buyer in such transaction as indicated on the purchase contract. Any escrow or closing agent may pay buyer broker's compensation from seller broker's compensation at close of escrow. Remember, this is an agreement between broker to broker. It's between the listing broker and the selling broker, right? Listing broker got permission from seller to pay this amount for the listing side compensation and this amount for the buyer broker compensation. Now, listing broker is the one committed to do that. They're the one on the hook for the payment at close of escrow. The listing broker, CAB is broker to broker, right? Does everybody get that? Currently what we do, folks, it's just, we don't think about it that way, right? It always runs from our brokerage, if we're the listing brokerage, to the other brokerage, broker to broker. All right, lease side is the same as the sale. I'm not going to repeat that. It's the same way. Remedies. We're not going to read through this, right? Again, ADR is a part of all of our contracts. Basically says we're going to try to do mediation before we deal with lawsuits in the courts in most situations. So, additional terms and conditions. Not sure what you would write in here, but I'm sure somebody will try to put something here. You've already got the property address. You can't single out the property address. We already know that. So we'll see what people come up with. Assignment. Neither seller broker nor buyer broker may assign any rights or obligations pursuant to this agreement without the prior written consent of the other, and any attempted assignment without consent shall be void and of no effect. We do have assignments on many types of contracts, but your commission, remember this is a commission, is not one you can assign. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what the assignment issue is there. Arizona law copies and counterparts, these are very similar to our other documents. Entire agreement, please realize this agreement shall supersede any other written or oral agreements. If you have an email from the listing broker that says, we're going to pay you 6 potatoes, right? And then this document is signed, this document supersedes any of that, right? Does that make sense? It says it supersedes any other written or oral agreements. You have something from a website that said, this is what I pay on all of my listings. This document will supersede, right? Okay. So when this class was done on Thursday, there was a question about bonus compensation. It won't exist up front, right? Does everybody understand that? If your buyer broker agreement has a specific, has to be an ascertainable amount, right? Specific amount, and somebody's offering a bonus above that amount, you do not get that money, right? We discussed this last week. If you're having any questions on that, please see me. Doesn't mean you can't do an addendum to your buyer broker agreement to modify that activity, maybe for a specific property even, right? Okay, let's see what page I'm on. All right, don't know, we don't know how long the CAB form will be here for. And that is a very real statement, because if you are following what is going on with the California Association of Realtors, there are some major concerns. The Department of Justice stepped in as California was revising their forms. The DOJ ultimately appeared and it appears that the DOJ ultimately wants to remove any broker-to-broker compensation. They shut down California. Now, California had a lot of other things in this agreement similar to this. They had a lot of other things in there that could have been the main issue, but that form disappeared, okay? In Nevada, they no longer have any broker-to-broker compensation. So again, there are other states that are doing this. Currently, we have this form. You are welcome to use it, or you don't have to use it. I'll show you another little graphic that might help you later on. But in my office, I'm not going to say don't use it. I'm going to say use it if you're comfortable with it, right? But ultimately, if you cannot reach a listing agent, move on. Do not hold off your buyer's offers. Get those offers in. And if you can't get that CAB form, move on. And this is what you're going to move on to, is the seller compensation addendum. Okay. So before this, let's talk about something. We're hearing people say all of this is a violation of the Code of Ethics. Let's go right to the standard of practice 1616. Does 1616 prohibit the negotiation of buyer broker compensation in a buyer's purchase offer? This is straight from NAR. This is not from us here in Arizona. This is from the National Association of Realtors and the Code of Ethics standard of practice, okay? No. A buyer can always ask their buyer broker to make it a term of an offer to purchase that the seller pays certain compensation to the buyer broker. Standard of practice 1616 prohibits a realtor from attempting to modify the terms of a listing agreement through the terms of an offer, because the listing agreement is a contractual matter between the seller and the listing broker, right? However, the seller and listing broker may independently choose to amend the listing agreement or take any other action they deem appropriate based on the seller's negotiations with the buyer. Seller and buyer, right? Standard of practice 1616 also prohibits a realtor from delaying or withholding delivery of a buyer's offer while attempting to negotiate a buyer broker compensation. Huh? Isn't that what we were just talking about? Right? So there would be a violation. The buyer negotiating with the seller to cover compensation for the buyer broker is not a violation of the Code of Ethics. Absolutely not. If anybody tells you that, please feel free to send them my way. I think I'm going to print this out and put it in my office. So, okay. Again, just back to that, this is not about agents fighting about commission. This is between the buyer and the seller, and they can have those negotiations. The distinction is who is asking and why, right? You are not asking, the buyer is asking. Seller is responding, and they are negotiating, not you, all right? Please do not write your own clauses into terms of the contract for payment, right? Do not add your payment comments or clauses about payment anywhere in here. We've already got stuff very clearly delineated, all right? Seller compensation addendum. This is the one Leah loves and I think is going to be the standard. And there are lots of great reasons for this. I'm going to go through part of it very quickly and then we'll get to the meat of it. Some of it's very simple. So did you have questions? Or we good?
No.
Okay. All right. So, and we're doing good on time, right? Perfect. We've got good timing here. All right. So originated by, this is an addendum originated by the seller, buyer, landlord, tenant. I would think in most times it will be by the buyer, but I guess the seller could respond with this if they got an offer. Perhaps something in concessions, they could respond and say, let's take it out of concessions, I guess. So it could come that way, but for the most part, if you're a buyer's agent, this is going to be the document you are going to prepare, especially if you're not using that CAB form, right? This is an addendum of the contract lease agreement dated, whatever date that this is being written, buyer, tenant, landlord, seller, landlord, et cetera, the premises, right? So this is for a specific property. The following additional terms and conditions are hereby included as part of the contract or lease agreement between seller and buyer for the above referenced premises. Please note, we always use the word premises, not properties. I see some of you write properties in your contracts. Always use the word premises because that's what the contract has at the very top of it. And it's a capital P because it's the address you're dealing with on those documents. So seller shall pay broker representing buyer compensation as follows. All right. Check any that apply and fill in the compensation. First line, seller percentages of the full purchase price, or in this case, 2 peaches at close of escrow. She switched to peaches. All right. Lease, same thing. For those that are not familiar, the lease is of the gross rental amount as calculated for the term of the initial lease. So that's the percent of, say, a year. You would take the monthly amount times 12 months, and that would then be times whatever that percentage is. Or again, she left the peaches off, but the dollar amount at execution lease agreement. This is very important. This compensation, let's see if I got the right place here. This compensation is in addition to any seller concessions credited to buyer in the contract, if applicable. Please note the words "in addition." We'll get to that a little later, but it's very, very important. They already cover any concessions so that this is in addition, right? If the contract says certain amount of concessions, this would be in addition to that. Again, we'll talk about that later. You've already heard this. What if this weakens my buyer's offer? Okay, you're sending over and saying, we want X dollars. You know, my buyer is worried that this is weakening their offer. Well, could the overall net offer weaken your buyer's offer? Well, yeah, it could. So could be asking for concessions, right? If they need closing costs. So could asking for a rate buy down. That's always been the case. This is negotiable. Now, how many of you think that if a seller hasn't changed their list price, they currently have some peaches on the market for how much they're offering as compensation, right? Some percentage is already listed as co-broke. They haven't changed the list price, and you don't have the cab form, but you send over a seller compensation addendum, right? Sellers already pre-calculated some of that in their mind. They've already talked to their listing agent about it, right? So this isn't coming out of the blue. The question is, how much are you asking for? And how much is your buyer able to participate with this or not? Again, if they can't, then you're going to negotiate, right? It comes down to the totality of the terms of the offer. Here's where you become that expert negotiator, all of us, right? So check if applicable. Pursuant to a separate written agreement, seller broker has agreed to compensate buyer broker in the amount of blank of the full purchase price, or again, some peaches, which is independent of, in addition to, the compensation of this addendum. What is this referring to? Any guesses? The cab agreement, right? So if they've already done a cab agreement that says X percent, then it gets written in here, because the cab agreement starts that foundation, then the SCA can go on top of it. And it may be all of it, or you may have to go after a little more in concessions, right? But this is to reference the cab agreement is in addition to this. Does that make sense to everybody? Seeing a lot of blank stares. Okay. This is how you use the SCA to fill in if the cab does not cover all of your buyer broker agreement. Okay. Next section says this addendum provides the undersigned's written consent for the buyer broker to receive compensation from more than one party to this transaction. This is legal issue to cover and allow you to receive compensation. You got to have the lawyers have something in here, right? So seller and buyer explicitly intend brokers to be direct third-party beneficiaries of the contract and or lease agreement pursuant to this addendum and either section 8F or section 9Q of the contract. This provision of this addendum shall survive close of escrow. Again, some legal requirements that are needed to get us through the process, right? Additional terms and conditions, and then finally the buyer signatures. Okay, for those that are wondering, there is a new box on your purchase contract that says SCA. Is there a new box that says CABB on the purchase contract? No, why? It's not between the buyer and seller. It's between brokers. It's not a part of the contract. It has to tie into this document, right? But it does not tie into the purchase contract. This is directly a part of the purchase contract. Okay, let's see some other, these are some questions from the other day. Will appraiser get a copy of the SCA? Does an appraiser get a copy of every addendum in your contract? Yes. Absolutely. The lender and title and appraiser get copies of addendums to the contract. They don't get a copy of the BINSR. The BINSR is not an addendum, it's something separate. But addendums, this is an addendum to your contract, absolutely. Why does the appraiser need to see it and why does the lender need to see it? Why? The appraiser sees what is currently being offered as a co-broke right now. Why would they not see what's being offered as a part of the compensation on this?
I see. I got an answer for someone, it could affect the price.
Someone online said it could affect the price. The appraiser needs to see it because it's all part of the numbers that they're looking at. They look at concessions all the time. Unfortunately, agents don't typically write the concessions into the MLS very well. And again, there will be no place that you can put compensation into the MLS, even as you're reporting concessions. It will simply say concessions. So
Can this be done way after the contract is submitted?
So the question is, could this be done way after the contract is submitted? It can be. How likely it will get approved, I don't know. I would recommend that it be part of your offer because the seller is looking at the totality of the offer. Now, could it be renegotiated or modified during either the inspection or the appraisal process? It could be. But remember, if this is modified, what agreement covers your buyer broker compensation, sorry? The buyer broker addendum, you're already covered. Your buyer is covering that. So if you as a buyer's agent are all of a sudden looking at this as needing to be reviewed under the inspection or the appraisal section, right? If it doesn't appraise, you need to make sure if this gets edited that you remind your buyer you are coming in with that additional money out of your pocket because it's a condition of closing. You must have those dollars for closing costs. Hold on one second. So if buyer does not have their closing costs, then they could be in a potential breach of contract. It is not, buyers cannot all of a sudden have a failure on their loan for lack of funds. Lack of funds is a breach of contract. Was that?
If the seller comes back with 0 breaches, let's say, can the buyer cancel the contract?
Buyer's not under contract. If this gets countered out, they haven't agreed to anything yet. This is a part of your offer. That's why it goes in as a part of the offer. There's no agreement.
When I say like the seller agrees to the offer in a contract.
This is part of the contract offer. It goes with the offer. There's a box saying this is attached, right? And so how do you, if the seller wanted to counter this, how do they counter it? On the counter offer, any addendum, use the counter offer. It's a part of the contract. So you absolutely would say seller, line 10 of the seller compensation addendum shall be modified to read right? And again, you're not under contract until both parties have agreed to those terms. And I think that's why it's so important that it's a part of the offer package, because that way the seller's looking for all the pieces. And again, I'm sure we're talking about this next week. If Leah doesn't cover it, I will, but as a part of the listing agent is gonna have to be very careful with their sellers to make sure all these numbers are being reviewed as they're looking at what is my bottom line? What's my bottom amount that I'm gonna come out with, right? So somebody asked the other day, how can we verify if they have their closing costs? How do we know if a buyer has their funds for closing? What are the two ways? LSU, well, the LSU isn't done in the beginning. Prequel. And there were some suggestions that the prequel needs to be adjusted to say that the buyer does need assistance from the seller for compensation, and we'll see if that gets changed. But who else do you talk to find out if the buyer has? The lender. Right? The lender's supposed to be checking for proof of funds. And by the way, I've been seeing a lot of folks that are having contracts that have 10, 20, 30, $40,000 of down payment, and they're not asking for proof of those funds. Please, folks, if somebody's putting down really any more than I'd say $5,000, why are you not asking for proof of funds? Right? Do they have these funds? So that is part of what you can do. Find out if they have their down payment and reserves. Again, part of the reason the lender needs to know the buyer broker agreement. What is the buyer obligated to cover? They're obligated for certain amounts to cover, and the lender needs to keep track of that. Okay. So, I mean, great. If the buyer says, I don't have the funds to pay you, then you have to include an offer that covers that compensation. So that's part of the whole negotiation process. All about negotiations. I've been saying since the beginning of this, since October, that I think the value of this whole restructuring is that it gives us the opportunity to negotiate and work on behalf of our buyers and our sellers, but on behalf of our buyers to negotiate a deal that works for them. I think there's a positive here. I know a lot of you are like, oh, I can see the faces in the room. I can't see you guys online, but trust me, the faces in the room are like, oh my gosh. So if the buyer really likes the home and the seller is not negotiating any further and you are short on what is required for the buyer broker fee, and buyer does not have enough for closing costs, you still have some options, right? You can change your buyer broker agreement. You could change it specific to this property, right? I'm not changing the regular one, but on this particular property, if we're able to negotiate it through, I will take ... right? Or, you know what's funny? I don't know about you, but it's amazing. Your buyer may all of a sudden come up with the extra dollars to cover that fee that's not covered by the seller. How many of them have been in a bind and all of a sudden, oh, I've got an extra $5,000. Forgot to tell you about that, right? So again, this is negotiation. You are not preventing the buyer because of your compensation. This is their choice on where their dollars take them. And you may have some hard discussions with some buyers to say, it does not appear like you have enough money or enough credit, etc., from other parties here to make this deal go forward with you. Your comment earlier, do they have to move forward? They're not going to move forward, right? And it's going to be a conversation you're going to need to have with some of those buyers. I think it's time we move on and look for another property that fits what you're looking for. Same thing you would do is if they needed, I don't know, they needed $19,000 to buy down the interest rate to be able to qualify for the loan. Same conversation. You can't get, you know, that $19,000 for the buy down rate. You can't get the closing costs. They don't have enough to stack up here. Move on, find another property, right?
But I think a lot of clients will put pressure back. To lower the next.
So somebody's in here is saying that he thinks that buyers will put the pressure on us to make the deal go through. I think that if you have conveyed your value and who you are and what you bring to the table, that yes, you may see some pressure, but I think you also need to have a backbone. And part of that backbone is, if I can't negotiate on my behalf, how am I negotiating on your behalf as we go through? This is only the beginning of negotiations. We've got multiple times in the process that I'm going to be negotiating on your behalf. And we're just starting. And if you think I'm going to back down now, I'm not going to back down on this. And if we are too far apart to do that right now. Because remember, you may need to kick something in at the end. If you do that right now, because they're not coming to an agreement, I think you are probably going to do that once or twice. And then you're going to learn, I need to go the distance. And I need to learn when to tell my buyers, look, I've seen this before. This is probably out of your reach unless you can find some more funds someplace else. Right? Does that make sense? All right. So, again, Leah's comment is she feels like the seller compensation addendum is the best path most likely to address buyer broker compensation. So I thought this was interesting. Leah said she's seeing from several top listing agents that the seller is going to leave the buyer broker section blank in their upcoming listings because the seller is not going to agree to a fixed amount up front. The listing agents will inform the buyer broker to submit the SCA with the offer package. I have not, asked agents in our office about that. I think it's an interesting philosophy. Again, I think we're going to see both of that. I don't think it's going to be across the board either way. I think there are going to be some listing agents that are going to encourage to go ahead and continue having a buyer broker fee in their listing agreements and offer that using the CAB form. Others may say, let's see where the chips may fall. Let's go ahead and tell people to submit their offer. I know even when I did have an amount on one I was dealing with several months ago, they wanted to adjust it up because they had a buyer broker agreement and they wanted to get all their peaches, right? That's fine. They said, will the seller pay it? My comment was, I don't know, what's your offer? Right? I can't answer that on behalf of the seller. All I can do is send your offer over, let me get it presented. Now, with this whole thing, the comment would be send the SCA with it and we'll present it to the seller and see what they say. Okay. So I'm preparing you guys. Both of those are options on both sides of this. Some listing agents may say, not going to provide it. And this goes back to, okay, if I'm a buyer broker and I, for some reason, got my buyer to write in writing, do not show me any properties, I'm encouraging you not to have your buyers do that. This is all about negotiation. This is up to you to set up who you are and if you are comfortable with negotiating, right? And selling that to your buyers that you are comfortable in negotiating. Let's see what we can put together and present this to the sellers and get you the best deal possible. My goal is to negotiate most, if not all, of the buyer broker agreement that we've done to get somebody else to pay that. If I can't do that, if we are not able to do that with all of the other things that you may or may not need, then you do understand that you're obligated to pay me that. Okay. But ultimately, my goal is going to be to get all of this negotiated. So the SCA is an addendum between the buyer and seller and is incorporated in the contract. To counter it, it's countered on the counteroffer. Listing agents and sellers. Folks, you're not permitted to get a copy of the buyer broker agreement. Please don't ask. And buyer agents, somebody asks you for that, please don't give that to them. That is a private employment agreement. I have heard several people say, well, can we find out what was on the buyer broker agreement so we know how much they've asked for? No, you can't. Just the same reason, can I get a copy of your listing agreement? I'd like to see your ER, please, because I'd like to see what you listing agents are getting compensated. Yeah, no, not going to happen. Those are private agreements. Please don't send them over. And by the way, some of the times that they accidentally get sent over is when you do a whole list of documents that you're sending through to your buyer to sign and you include that buyer broker agreement and then you send it on with a contract. Disclosures should be on a totally different set of signing documents. All of your disclosures, purchase contract should be on its own. Please, please don't put those on the same signing package. Right? Because you're handing over some valuable information. Does that make sense? And I do think that one of the reasons sellers might not want to say randomly offer 3 peaches, right? Is because if the buyer broker agreement, maybe it's only for 1 peach, who knows, right? Then the seller's already agreeing to give 2 peaches of concessions to the buyer. They may not have had to do that. So I do get the validity of why some sellers may not want to do it. I don't know whether it's necessary or not. I think as long as you're getting your seller the money they want, and they're acknowledging a certain amount of concessions, they're getting what they want, the buyer's getting what they want. I still believe that you can have a win-win and both parties can win. So I would try to be moving forward with that type of focus. If an appraisal comes in low, buyer and seller have to look at all terms of the contract, right? They're gonna have to play with all of these numbers. It's not just one. The buyer broker is not the only item that would be reviewed. Buyer-based transactions in SkySlope. Yay! This is gonna be coming soon. I'm hoping it comes out before the 1st, just so we don't have another thing on the 1st. So when you sign a buyer broker agreement, it will need to be entered into SkySlope within 72 hours of those signatures being signed, just like any other contract. Technically, it should have been all along, right? But our SkySlope system currently operates off of an address. They are modifying that so it can go in. I believe it's going to go under a name for your buyer broker. And then when you take that buyer broker to a contract, it's going to have a transition, just like you would on a listing contract to listing agreement to go to a contract. I'm sure it's going to have a buyer broker, and then you click on it to take that to contract. Does that make sense? Okay, I haven't seen it, but I've heard that it is coming. I'm hoping it comes sooner rather than later. All right. So there are potentially 5 ways to be paid as a buyer broker. Directly by your buyer, right? As part of their closing costs. Again, it's part of their closing costs at close of escrow per a buyer broker agreement. Number 2, through concessions paid by the seller on behalf of the buyer at close of escrow. Number 3, from the listing broker as agreed to on the CAB form. Folks, I'm going to give you all these slides, so you're going to get them. Directly from the seller as agreed to on the seller compensation addendum. Or 5, some combination of the above. Now, I had fun playing with a form. A new flow chart. Okay. It's next level. I tried to color code it. If you notice, I used the 1, 2, 3, 4 from the page before. Basically, if you start on the right-hand side of this page, the buyer meets with a buyer broker and they create a buyer broker agreement. That is the first way that you are going to be compensated and must be done, period. You can put 0 in there, but that buyer or broker agreement must be done. And if you put 0 in there, you are getting 0 compensation. So that's up to you. I did not put buyer broker exclusive employment agreement. It's either BBA does have either a specific amount. Well, it has to have a specific amount, either percentage or a dollar amount, right? So it starts with that side. That's number 1. Now, number 2, the way Leah had this says seller paid concessions to the buyer. We didn't talk a lot about this. One of the reasons is because what is a challenge with seller concessions? Does anybody want to comment on that? Does anybody know one of the challenges with concessions? If there's financing, there may be limitations to those concessions. So if the buyer can only receive 3%, or believe it or not, if it's a investor loans can only get 2% in concessions. Okay. So, and those are limitations from the lender. I did bring something from Epic. If you're here, I will add that when I send out my other stuff, but that talks about what some of those limitations, because the down payment impacts how much, both the down payment and the loan type impact how much can be offered depending on the loan and type of loan. Again, so.
Hi, Melissa.
Yes. Hi,
Hey,
Barb.
it's Barb.
Hi.
Yeah, if you have a conventional loan and they're only putting 5% down, they only are allowed up to 3% in seller concessions. But if they put 10% to 25% down, they get 6%. And if they put more than 25%, they get 9%. FHA is capped at 6%. And then VA, it says 4%, but you can get more than 4%. And the reason for that is because there's different terminology for certain costs that would not go under the seller concessions, and they would be allowed more credits. I had 2 of those deals back to back where they got about 5% and they were able to utilize all of it.
Well, and Barb, that brings up a great point, right? So seller paid concessions are an option, but again, there are some limitations to those. But you can use some seller paid concessions and the seller compensation agreement. The seller compensation or the CAB forms are not considered against those concession amounts that the lender looks at. So that's why we have these other options here. So if we go, and thank you, Barb. Barb is with Epic. If you've not talked to her, she's a great person to give a call to and go over this if you have any questions on those amounts. And
And
thanks.
I also, I put that cheat sheet on the Facebook page, and I know you have a copy of it up there. So yeah,
and
happy to help if
I'll
anyone
attach-
has questions.
I'll attach it
Thanks.
to send it to everybody on the call as well. So number 2 is the seller paid concessions. I have the asterisk there, and that's why down on the bottom, you'll say buyer's lender may have concession limitations depending on the loan, down payment, et cetera. That is written into the purchase contract, right? Then we have the compensation agreement between brokers, the CAB form, that's between listing broker to buyer broker, and that comes directly from the seller who's met with the listing broker and as a part of the listing agreement has agreed to pay a certain amount to the listing broker that then the listing broker is sharing, right, is sending over specific to a buyer broker. The ER does change. If you've not seen that ER, the ER has changed in the way it's formatted. The listing broker gets their amount. There's a separate line that goes to the buyer broker. And then number 4 is that seller compensation addendum that the buyer can request seller to compensate buyer broker as terms of the purchase contract. 3 and 4 are not a part of the concessions. So again, you can play with these numbers in different ways. Leah's point is the cleanest way to do this without all this confusion is just use the SCA. You're not touching concessions. You're not having to get anything from the listing broker. You just submit the number that you're looking for to the seller. So that certainly is a very clean way to look at it. And I agree with her. It does work very smoothly that way. If you already know that there is a CAB and you do reach the listing broker, then you can get that and put that in there. And then add, if you don't have enough, add your SCA. So again, you can do any combination of these. No, the 5th was any combination of the above. Okay. So, I love Leah's final slide. I really wanted to add something else, but if you are not feeling like this, I'm scared to death, I'm frightened, I don't know what to do. I'm confused and I just want to go home.
Is this during his trial?
I don't know when Johnny Depp's from. So the point is, my question is, what are the agents going to take how are they going to take this message to the market, right? This is up to you to not only determine what your value is and how you're going to communicate that with your clients, whether it's a buyer or seller. And I appreciate this slide. I would encourage you to look at this on the positive side. Find your value. Find your comfort in all of this discomfort and be prepared to step forward with that. As a leader, lead your clients. Does that make sense? You have the opportunity to really share your strengths. I think there are going to be people all over the place that are going to be stumbling. You have the opportunity to take advantage of that and put yourself out there and get on top of these forms, be on top and be comfortable with communicating your value and why you are worth these dollars. We know there's going to be noise all around this from companies saying, here, I'll do this for you for this and this for this. And what are they really providing? ask your client to carefully evaluate those before they jump into that, because a lot of what I've seen that they're offering is not so strong. Okay, questions? Do we have some online? No, no questions? How about in person? I have some questions that we didn't answer. That's why I pulled these sheets aside. Okay,
I have a quick question.
yes,
Just to kind of confirm,
yes,
so obviously August first, we're going to go live, if we're going into contract like today,
yes.
and our buyer broker and the conversation, if it closes August 19, will it just close the old way?
Yes. So the question was, what happens if you have a current, I'm going to expand this. If you have a current ER, you do not need to do anything with the ER. The ER stays in place. If you are writing an ER, call me. I have a little language you can add to the bottom of it to make sure that you're having the conversation with the seller, that they understand that the compensation is going away and that they're instructing you on how they want to move forward with your disclosures. That's fine. It's not required to revise an ER. The ER will stand, okay? If they want to modify the ER, you use a listing contract addendum to modify the existing ER you have. Thank Leah for that. This is from Ron. This is for Realty One Group. If we have people that are not with Realty One Group here, please check with your brokers on how they want you to handle the ER. Buyer broker agreements. If you have a current buyer broker agreement, you must revise that buyer broker agreement, rewrite one on August 1st on the new form. You may not use a buyer broker agreement that is in existence after August 1st because the specific terms on there are in violation of the NAR settlement, okay? Those files in escrow that are pending closing, you do not need to do anything with it. They will be paid as they're already structured. You are under contract and following the terms of that contract. That is not a problem. However, if it falls out of escrow, understand that you must initiate a buyer broker agreement to move forward with that buyer. Does that answer all those questions? Okay. Other questions? All right, hold on. I had some other ones that I put this aside because, oh, I thought I did. I guess not. Any other questions? Yes.
If the buyer wants to negotiate, our concession, our commission in a contract, he can only do it as a concession.
Okay, so
or Section 8.
you are not to negotiate your compensation in the purchase contract.
That's what they pay you.
No, no. The buyer cannot negotiate your compensation in the purchase contract. They can negotiate with the seller to pay money towards it. But if they're negotiating your compensation, that is the employment, the buyer tenant employment agreement addendum. You have to modify your buyer broker agreement. You can modify it for one property. You don't have to modify it for the term of that agreement, right? So if you're negotiating one thing and say, okay, on this deal right now, I will adjust this, that's fine, but that's not on the purchase contract. Please let me make sure you guys understand that. Do not negotiate your buyer broker agreement in the purchase contract. You have another addendum for that. Okay? You had a question.
On the MLS, August 1st, is all the compensation just gonna magically disappear?
Yes, it will. Don't worry, ARMLS was not expecting all the listing agents to go in and delete their fields. Yes, so on August 1st, the compensation field will disappear from not only residential, it will disappear from the rentals, it will disappear from any commercial that is in there. There will be no compensation anywhere in the MLS. Again, please do not write it in there. Do not write anything with regard to commission or compensation anywhere. For those that were not following, we have tried very carefully to use the word compensation, not commission, even though that's what we kind of refer to it as today. But all the documents have been made uniform. They used to have it interchangeable in our documents, and they went through and made it all compensation. So that's what you will see in the documents, okay? More questions? Anybody online? We still have 30 people. We still have 34 people. Anyone online, please put your comments in the chat or you're welcome to unmute at this point. We've got another question in the room. Hold on.
So I have a rental listing, and when that compensation goes away in MLS, I get a buyer's agent come to me, and they ask me for a CAD. Can I fill that out for the rental?
Call your landlord and verify, yes. So same thing, you probably need to let your landlord know that it's going away on August 1st.
Yeah, I already have.
Yep, and as long as they say, yes, you can do that, then yes, you can fill that out. Well, yeah, I mean, you may want to send them something, hey, just want to confirm our conversation. CYA yourself, right? Have the conversation and follow up with a CYA letter. Thanks for taking the time for my phone call to explain the changes on August 1st. If someone calls about compensation, I will send over the CAB form. Otherwise, you can say, please include it on an SCA. The forms are interchangeable for leases and for sales. All right, anyone online? No, you guys are quiet. Okay. Anything else in the room? So next week, we are going to cover the listing agreement changes. Now, please remember that we have not in any way, shape, or form in these 3 weeks covered all 18 forms that are changing. Now, the good news is some of them won't impact you at all. They're commercial. The documents that are having to change for sale are also having to change for commercial and rentals. If you're not doing any rentals, those rental forms are changing, right? So we've covered all the new forms. A lot of the other forms, at least go look at them. So you're aware they're out there. I have been posting all of these links. We will get the video up hopefully either later today or tomorrow. It takes a little while to download. But we will get that on there for you. And I will also send over, as I said, this epic form in there. All the slides will be there. Those of you taking photos, please know the slides will be available on a separate PDF, so you can flip through them if you don't want to listen to the video again. Not a problem at all, but they will be available to you. Gosh, thank you so much for coming. It was nice having people in here. I'm glad we had another about 30, 40 people online. I really appreciate it. If you know anybody that has not been coming into the office, please reach out to them. We're trying to figure out how to reach the people that aren't getting the message.
Well, that fine will help. We'll get that first. I mean, money talks, right? So, you meet us on-
Well, we know we're going to hear from people the second week of August. Hold on a second. I'm going to stop my recording here. Let me stop the recording.